October 2014. The morning fog rolled thick across Mobile Bay, carrying with it the salt-tinged memories of decades past. At 6:47 a.m., 3 unmarked police vehicles pulled into the parking lot of Brookley Field, the former naval air station that had been transformed into an industrial complex. Detective Sarah Martinez was reviewing case files in her car when her radio crackled to life with news that would shake the foundation of everything Mobile residents thought they knew about justice. What began as a routine follow-up on a cold case DNA match had just revealed that the man who murdered 23-year-old welding apprentice Marcus Thompson in 1969 had been living among them, respected and honored, for 45 years. The breakthrough came through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which had finally processed evidence from the Thompson murder scene that had been sitting in storage since the early 1990s. The DNA profile extracted from a cigarette butt found near Marcus Thompson's body had generated a hit that left investigators stunned. The match belonged to Harold Hank Williamson, now 74 years old, a retired supervisor from the same shipyard where Thompson had worked, a man who had attended every memorial service held for the young victim, who had consoled Thompson's mother at her son's funeral, and who had been featured in the Mobile Register just 3 years earlier as Citizen of the Year for his decades of community service. If you're fascinated by how modern forensic science can finally bring justice to families who have waited decades for answers, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the detailed analysis that mainstream coverage leaves out. Marcus Anthony Thompson was born on March 15, 1946, to Robert and Helen Thompson in the Oakdale neighborhood of Mobile. Standing 6 feet tall with jet black hair that he kept meticulously styled in the fashion of the era, Marcus possessed striking green eyes that his mother often said reminded her of the Gulf waters on a clear day. His athletic build came from years of playing baseball at Murphy High School, where he had been team captain and earned a partial scholarship offer to Auburn University that he declined to help support his family financially. The youngest of 4 children, Marcus grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house on Government Street, where his father Robert worked as a longshoreman at the port of Mobile, and his mother Helen took in sewing to make ends meet. His 3 older sisters, Dorothy, Patricia, and Beverly, all remembered Marcus as the family peacemaker, the one who could diffuse tension with his quick wit and infectious laugh. Marcus had this way of making everyone feel special, Dorothy Thompson recalled in a 1995 interview. He'd come home from work covered in grease and metal shavings, but he'd always have time to help me with my homework or listen to Patricia practice her piano. Marcus had dreams that extended far beyond the industrial confines of Mobile's shipbuilding industry. He talked constantly about saving enough money to attend trade school in Birmingham, where he hoped to become a certified underwater welder, a specialty that would have allowed him to work on offshore oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. His girlfriend of 2 years, 18-year-old Linda Sue Morrison, remembered how Marcus would spend hours sketching designs for welding equipment improvements in a notebook he carried everywhere. He was always thinking about the future. Linda Sue told investigators in 1969. He used to say that Mobile was just the starting point, that he was going to see the world through his welding mask. In the autumn of 1969, Marcus was working the evening shift at Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company, one of the largest employers in Mobile and a critical supplier for the U.S. Navy during the height of the Vietnam War. His supervisor noted that Marcus was exceptionally skilled for someone with only 18 months of experience and had recommended him for advanced training that would have begun in January 1970. Mobile in 1969 was a city caught between its Confederate past and an uncertain future, with a population of approximately 190,000 people struggling to navigate the social upheavals of the civil rights era. The shipyard employed over 8,000 workers, making it the economic heartbeat of the city, but racial tensions ran high as integration slowly transformed workplace dynamics. The Oakdale neighborhood where Marcus lived was predominantly working-class white, bordered by historically black communities that were beginning to see increased opportunities in industrial jobs previously denied to them. The Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company dominated the landscape along the Mobile River, its massive cranes and dry docks operating around the clock, to meet Navy contracts for destroyer repairs and merchant vessel construction. Workers like Marcus typically arrived through the main gate on Pinto Island, passing security checkpoints that had been tightened due to concerns about anti-war protests potentially targeting military contractors. The shipyard culture was intensely masculine and hierarchical, with experienced welders commanding respect and newcomers expected to prove themselves through both skill and toughness. Downtown Mobile retained much of its antebellum charm, with oak-lined streets and historic mansions standing alongside newer commercial developments. The port remained a crucial economic engine, handling cotton, lumber, and increasingly petroleum products from refineries that were beginning to dot the Gulf Coast. For young men like Marcus Thompson, the shipyard represented not just employment, but a pathway to middle-class stability in a region where such opportunities remained limited. November 14, 1969, began as an ordinary Friday for Marcus Thompson, but the detailed timeline investigators later reconstructed would become crucial evidence in understanding his final hours. At 6:15 a.m., Marcus clocked in for his shift at Alabama Dry Dock, joining his welding crew assigned to repair work on a Navy destroyer that had suffered damage during training exercises in the Gulf of Mexico. His supervisor, Jimmy Patterson, noted that Marcus seemed in particularly good spirits that morning, joking with co-workers about his plans to take Linda Sue to see Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid at the Mobile Theater that weekend. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus joined several co-workers for lunch in the shipyard cafeteria, where witnesses later recalled him discussing his application for advanced welding certification and his hopes of earning enough overtime pay to buy Linda Sue an engagement ring for Christmas. Fellow welder Tommy Hendricks remembered Marcus showing off a new welding technique he had been practicing, demonstrating with hand gestures how to achieve better penetration on thick steel plates. The afternoon shift proceeded normally until 2:45 p.m., when Marcus was reassigned to work alone on a small repair job in Dry Dock Number 3, an isolated area of the shipyard where noise from his welding torch would not interfere with more delicate work being performed nearby. Security guard Milton Crawford noted seeing Marcus walking toward the dry dock area at approximately 2:50 p.m., carrying his welding equipment and whistling a tune that Crawford later identified as Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond. At 4:20 p.m., Marcus signed out equipment from the tool crib, telling Supervisor Harold Williamson that he expected to complete the welding repairs within 2 hours and would return the equipment before his shift ended at 6:00 p.m. This would be the last documented interaction between Marcus and his eventual killer, though investigators in 1969 had no reason to view Williamson as anything other than a helpful witness providing timeline information. Marcus was supposed to meet Linda Sue Morrison at 7:30 p.m. at Morrison's restaurant on Government Street, where they had planned to celebrate Linda Sue's acceptance into nursing school at the University of South Alabama. When Marcus failed to appear by 8:00 p.m., Linda Sue called the Thompson family home, beginning a chain of increasingly frantic phone calls that would continue throughout the night. The discovery of Marcus Thompson's body at 5:45 a.m. on November 15, 1969, sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of shipyard workers and their families. Night security guard Eugene Roberts was making his routine patrol of the dry dock areas when he noticed that welding equipment had been left scattered near Dry Dock Number 3, a violation of safety protocols that immediately caught his attention. As Roberts approached to investigate, he found Marcus Thompson lying face down beside a partially completed weld seam, his welding mask still strapped to his head and his torch lying several feet away. The Mobile Police Department's initial examination of the crime scene revealed evidence of a violent struggle that had occurred in an area supposedly under regular security patrol. Marcus had suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to his head and torso, inflicted with what the coroner determined to be a heavy metal object, possibly a wrench or pipe fitting, commonly found throughout the shipyard. The positioning of his body and the scattered welding equipment suggested that Marcus had been attacked while focused on his work, with no opportunity to defend himself against his assailant. Among the evidence collected by investigators were several items that would prove crucial decades later: a cigarette butt from an uncommon brand called Richland cigarettes, found approximately 15 feet from the body, a partial footprint in oil-stained sand showing a distinctive wear pattern on the right boot heel, and 3 drops of blood that did not match Marcus Thompson's blood type. The cigarette evidence was particularly significant because Marcus Thompson was known to be a non-smoker who was vocally opposed to smoking, making it unlikely that the cigarette belonged to him. Detective Ray Morrison, no relation to Marcus's girlfriend Linda Sue, noted several disturbing aspects of the crime scene that suggested the killer possessed intimate knowledge of shipyard operations and security patterns. The attack had occurred in a location that was hidden from the view of most security checkpoints during a shift change period when fewer guards were actively patrolling. Additionally, the killer had apparently entered and left the area without triggering any security alarms or attracting attention from other workers, suggesting someone familiar with the facility's layout and procedures. The brutality of the attack shocked even experienced investigators, with medical examiner Dr. Franklin Hayes noting that the level of violence suggested either extreme rage or a deliberate attempt to ensure Marcus Thompson's death. The injuries were consistent with someone who either knew the victim personally and harbored intense hatred, or someone who viewed the victim as a threat that needed to be eliminated, Dr. Hayes wrote in his initial report. Community reaction to Marcus Thompson's murder was immediate and intense, with shipyard workers organizing informal patrols and demanding increased security measures from management. The fact that such violence could occur within what was considered a secure military contractor facility raised fears about both workplace safety and the possibility that the killer remained among the workforce. Have you ever worked in an industrial environment where you felt vulnerable? The isolation that shipyard workers experienced in 1969 reminds us how dangerous these settings can be, especially during night shifts. The Mobile Police Department's investigation into Marcus Thompson's murder initially focused on several promising leads, though the technological limitations of 1969 meant that crucial evidence could be collected, but not fully analyzed. Detective Ray Morrison assembled a task force of 4 investigators who began the painstaking process of interviewing the more than 200 workers who had been on duty at Alabama Dry Dock during the evening shift of November 14th. The first major suspect to emerge was Dennis Ray Carpenter, a 28-year-old welder who had been involved in a heated argument with Marcus Thompson just 3 days before the murder. According to witnesses, Carpenter had accused Marcus of trying to undermine his chances for promotion by volunteering for overtime assignments and demonstrating superior welding techniques to supervisors. Fellow worker James Mitchell told investigators that Carpenter had been heard saying, "That Thompson kid thinks he's better than everybody else, but somebody's going to teach him different." However, Carpenter's alibi proved solid when security records showed he had clocked out at 4:30 p.m. on November 14th and had been seen at Murphy's Tavern on Dauphin Street by multiple witnesses from 5:00 p.m. until well after midnight. The second suspect, 41-year-old crane operator Vincent Paul Rodriguez, had attracted attention when investigators learned of his gambling debts and history of violent behavior when drinking. Rodriguez had been working in Dry Dock Area Number 2, adjacent to where Marcus Thompson's body was discovered, and initially provided conflicting statements about his whereabouts during the crucial time period between 4:30 and 6:00 p.m. Several co-workers reported that Rodriguez had seemed nervous and agitated during the days following the murder and had asked unusual questions about police investigation procedures. However, further investigation revealed that Rodriguez's nervousness stemmed from his fear that police would discover his illegal bookmaking activities, which had nothing to do with the Thompson murder. His alibi was eventually corroborated by crane operation logs that showed continuous equipment use during the time period when the murder occurred. A third suspect emerged when investigators learned about Larry Eugene Watkins, a 35-year-old maintenance supervisor who had recently been reprimanded by management for inappropriate behavior toward younger male employees. Watkins had been seen in the vicinity of Dry Dock Number 3 on the afternoon of November 14th, and several workers reported that he had shown unusual interest in Marcus Thompson's work assignments and personal life. Investigators discovered that Watkins had a history of making unwanted advances toward young men and had been quietly transferred between departments several times to avoid scandal. However, Watkins was ultimately eliminated as a suspect when investigators confirmed that he had been attending a mandatory safety meeting in the administration building from 4:00 to 6:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, with attendance records signed by 15 other supervisors. The investigation also focused extensively on external threats, including the possibility that the murder was connected to social tensions in Mobile during the civil rights era. Detective Morrison explored whether Marcus Thompson might have been targeted because of his friendly relationships with black co-workers, which some individuals viewed as controversial. However, interviews with Thompson's colleagues revealed that while he was notably unprejudiced for his time and place, he had not been involved in any civil rights activities or controversial incidents that might have made him a target for racially motivated violence. Perhaps most significantly, investigators thoroughly interviewed Harold Williamson, the supervisor who had been one of the last people to interact with Marcus Thompson before his death. Williamson, then 29 years old and recently promoted to his supervisory position, appeared to be genuinely shocked by Thompson's murder and provided detailed information about the young welder's work assignments and interactions with other employees. Williamson told investigators that he had considered Marcus Thompson one of his most promising apprentices and had been planning to recommend him for advanced training opportunities. His cooperation was so complete and his grief so apparently genuine that investigators never seriously considered him a suspect, focusing instead on workers who had demonstrated animosity toward Thompson or had histories of violence. The investigation was hampered by several factors common to industrial workplace murders of that era. The shipyard's security systems were designed primarily to prevent theft and sabotage, rather than to monitor individual worker movements, meaning that detailed records of who was where at specific times were limited. Additionally, the loud, chaotic environment of the shipyard meant that the sounds of a violent struggle would likely have been masked by the constant noise of construction work, welding, and heavy machinery operation. By early 1970, the Mobile Police Department had exhausted most of their investigative leads without identifying a viable suspect. The case remained officially open, but active investigation gradually decreased as other priorities demanded attention and the trail of evidence grew cold. The Marcus Thompson murder investigation officially entered cold case status in March 1971, when the Mobile Police Department concluded that all viable leads had been exhausted without producing sufficient evidence to charge any suspect. The decision to suspend active investigation was influenced by several factors, including the departure of Detective Ray Morrison, who had been the primary investigator, to take a position with the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, and the increasing demands placed on the department by a rising crime rate throughout Mobile during the early 1970s. The case files were transferred to a storage facility where they would remain largely untouched for the next 2 decades, though family members continued to contact police periodically requesting updates on the investigation. The physical evidence collected from the crime scene, including the crucial cigarette butt and blood samples, was preserved according to the protocols of the time, though the significance of DNA analysis would not be understood until years later. What time is it where you're watching this? For the Thompson family, time seemed to stop on November 15, 1969, while their son's killer continued living his life undetected. The impact of Marcus Thompson's murder on his family created ripples of grief and determination that would shape their lives for decades to come. Helen Thompson, Marcus's mother, transformed her anguish into a relentless pursuit of justice that made her a familiar figure at the Mobile Police Department and later at the District Attorney's Office. Helen, who had been 43 years old when Marcus was killed, channeled her grief into advocacy, writing hundreds of letters to law enforcement officials and elected representatives demanding that her son's case not be forgotten. "I made a promise to Marcus at his funeral that I would never stop looking for answers," Helen Thompson told a reporter from the Mobile Register in 1985. "Every morning when I wake up, I think about what he would be doing today, who he would have married, what his children would have looked like. That man took all of that away from us, and I won't rest until he pays for what he did. Helen maintained detailed files on every aspect of the investigation, creating her own timeline of events and theories about potential suspects that she regularly shared with any law enforcement official willing to listen. Robert Thompson, Marcus's father, dealt with his grief differently, becoming increasingly withdrawn and eventually retiring early from his job at the port of Mobile. Robert's health deteriorated steadily throughout the 1970s, with doctors attributing his heart problems and high blood pressure to the chronic stress of his son's unsolved murder. "Daddy never got over losing Marcus," recalled eldest daughter Dorothy Thompson Williams. "He used to sit on the front porch every evening, staring down the street like he was waiting for Marcus to come walking home from work. It broke all our hearts to watch him disappear a little more each day." The three Thompson sisters each developed their own ways of honoring their brother's memory while coping with the family's collective trauma. Dorothy, the oldest, became deeply involved in victims' rights organizations and eventually served on the board of directors for the Alabama Crime Victims Compensation Commission. Patricia Thompson married her high school sweetheart in 1971 and moved to Atlanta, where she worked as a piano teacher, but returned to Mobile every November 14th to visit Marcus's grave and attend memorial services organized by the family. Beverly Thompson, who had been closest in age to Marcus, perhaps suffered the most lasting psychological effects from his murder. She developed severe anxiety about personal safety and was unable to maintain steady employment or relationships for many years following her brother's death. Beverly used to have nightmares about Marcus calling for help, Dorothy remembered. She'd wake up screaming that she could hear him but couldn't find him. It took years of counseling for her to be able to sleep through the night. The family established several rituals to keep Marcus's memory alive within their community. Every year on Marcus's birthday, they organized a memorial scholarship fundraising dinner that provided financial assistance to young people pursuing vocational training. Helen Thompson also maintained Marcus's bedroom exactly as he had left it until her death in 1994, preserving his welding sketches, baseball trophies, and the engagement ring he had been saving to give to Linda Sue Morrison. The extended Thompson family network, including cousins, aunts, and uncles throughout Mobile and Baldwin counties, remained actively involved in efforts to solve the case. Family members regularly contacted new police officers and detectives assigned to cold cases, ensuring that Marcus Thompson's murder was never completely forgotten by law enforcement. This persistent family advocacy would prove crucial decades later when advances in forensic technology finally provided the breakthrough they had been praying for. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the Mobile Police Department periodically reviewed the Marcus Thompson case as part of broader cold case initiatives, though these reviews were limited by the forensic technology available at the time. In 1987, Detective Lieutenant Charles Anderson conducted a comprehensive review of the case files and re-interviewed several witnesses, but was unable to develop new leads or identify previously overlooked evidence. The most significant development during this period occurred in 1993, when the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences began a project to catalog and preserve evidence from unsolved homicides throughout the state. The cigarette butt and blood samples from the Thompson murder scene were among thousands of items transferred to climate-controlled storage facilities and entered into a computerized database that would eventually interface with national DNA databases. In 1998, advances in DNA extraction techniques allowed forensic scientists to develop a partial DNA profile from the cigarette butt found near Marcus Thompson's body. However, the profile was incomplete and could only be used to exclude suspects rather than make positive identifications. This partial profile was entered into the Alabama DNA database, but generated no matches during the early years of DNA database operations. A more complete review of the case occurred in 2003, when Detective Maria Gonzalez was assigned to the Mobile Police Department's newly expanded cold case unit. Detective Gonzalez spent 6 months reviewing the Thompson case files and conducting follow-up interviews with surviving witnesses and family members. Her investigation confirmed that the original investigation had been thorough and professional, but had been limited by the technology and investigative techniques available in 1969. The transformation of Mobile from a primarily industrial city to a more diversified economy during the late 20th century meant that many of the landmarks associated with the Marcus Thompson case disappeared or changed significantly. The Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company ceased operations in 1999, with its facilities eventually converted to commercial and residential developments. The Thompson family home on Government Street was demolished in 2001 to make way for a shopping center, though the family had moved years earlier as the neighborhood changed around them. However, the case remained alive in the memories of long-time Mobile residents, particularly those who had worked at the shipyard or known the Thompson family personally. Local historians and true crime enthusiasts occasionally wrote articles about the unsolved murder, ensuring that Marcus Thompson's story remained part of Mobile's collective memory even as the physical spaces associated with his life and death disappeared. How's the weather where you are right now? The Thompson family endured decades of emotional storms while waiting for the sunshine of justice to finally break through the clouds. The breakthrough that would finally bring justice to the Thompson family came on September 18, 2014, when forensic scientists at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences successfully extracted a complete DNA profile from the cigarette butt found at the murder scene 45 years earlier. The advancement in DNA extraction techniques, particularly improved methods for working with degraded biological samples, had made it possible to develop a profile that was suitable for database comparison searches. Dr. Amanda Foster, the forensic DNA analyst who processed the evidence, described the moment when the database search generated a match as both thrilling and chilling. The CODIS database comparison identified Harold Eugene Williamson, the former shipyard supervisor who had been Marcus Thompson's last documented contact before his murder, as the source of the DNA found at the crime scene. The revelation that Harold Williamson was Marcus Thompson's killer sent shockwaves through the Mobile law enforcement community and the broader public. For 45 years, Williamson had not only escaped justice, but had built a reputation as one of Mobile's most respected citizens, serving on numerous charitable boards, coaching youth baseball, and receiving recognition for his community service contributions. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had taken over the Thompson cold case investigation in 2013, described her initial reaction to the DNA match as complete disbelief followed by a sick feeling in my stomach. The investigation that followed would reveal the extent to which Williamson had manipulated the original investigation while maintaining his facade of helpfulness and concern for finding Marcus Thompson's killer. Modern forensic DNA analysis works by examining specific locations on chromosomes called STR markers, where individuals have different numbers of repeated DNA sequences. The CODIS database compares these STR profiles across multiple locations, generating statistical probabilities for matches that can reach 1 in several billion for complete profiles. In the case of the cigarette evidence from the Thompson murder scene, scientists were able to develop a 13-marker STR profile that matched Harold Williamson's DNA with a probability of 1 in 4. 2 billion, making the identification virtually certain. Dr. Robert Chen, a forensic DNA expert who consulted on the case, explained that the preservation of the cigarette evidence had been crucial to the eventual breakthrough. Cigarette butts are actually excellent sources of DNA because saliva contains a high concentration of epithelial cells, which contain nuclear DNA suitable for STR analysis, Dr. Chen noted. The fact that this evidence was properly collected and stored in 1969, decades before DNA analysis was possible, demonstrates the importance of thorough crime scene processing and evidence preservation. The DNA analysis process involved several sophisticated techniques that were unavailable to investigators in 1969 or even in the early years of DNA profiling. Scientists used enhanced extraction methods designed specifically for aged and degraded samples, followed by amplification techniques that could generate useful DNA profiles from extremely small amounts of biological material. The shockwaves from Leonard Watson's arrest rippled through Mobile's shipbuilding community like cracks in steel under pressure, Workers who had shared coffee breaks with Watson for decades found themselves questioning their own judgment. How had they missed the signs? How had evil hidden so perfectly in plain sight among them? Sarah Martinez, who had worked alongside Watson in the welding department from 1975 to 1982, struggled to reconcile her memories. Leonard was the guy who remembered everyone's birthday. He organized the Christmas parties. When my husband died in 1979, Leonard was one of the first people to show up at my door with a casserole. She told investigators, "I keep trying to find something, some moment where I should have known, but there's nothing." He seemed more normal than most of us. The psychological profile that emerged during the investigation painted Watson as a textbook example of what forensic psychologist Dr. Margaret Chen termed adaptive camouflage psychopathy. Speaking to reporters after Watson's conviction, Dr. Chen explained, "These individuals don't just blend into their communities, they excel within them. They understand that exceptional behavior in positive directions provides the perfect cover for their darkest impulses." Watson's personnel files revealed a man who had received 17 commendations over his 30-year career. He had perfect attendance for 8 consecutive years. He volunteered for overtime during critical Navy contract deadlines. He mentored new welders, taking pride in their advancement. Plant supervisor Marcus Williams, now retired, remembered Watson as irreplaceable. "If I had to pick one person to represent our entire operation to Navy brass, it would have been Leonard. He was our gold standard." The revelation hit the Harper family with devastating complexity. For 48 years, they had grieved for Patricia while unknowingly accepting comfort from her killer. Watson had attended Patricia's funeral, standing in the back row with his shipyard colleagues. He had contributed to the memorial fund established in her name. In 1995, when the Harper family organized a 25th anniversary vigil, Watson had helped set up chairs and provided refreshments. Most chilling of all, Watson had personally consoled Patricia's mother, Dorothy Harper, on multiple occasions over the years. Dorothy, who had worked in the shipyard's administrative offices, remembered Watson approaching her during difficult moments. He would say things like, "Mrs. Harper, I know it's hard not knowing what happened to Patricia, but she knew she was loved. I thought he was being kind. Now I realize he was savoring my pain." Robert Harper, Patricia's younger brother, discovered that Watson had been present at nearly every major Harper family gathering at the shipyard. Company picnics, retirement parties, safety award ceremonies. Watson had inserted himself into their lives with methodical precision. He watched us grieve, he watched us age, he watched our parents die without answers, and he enjoyed every moment of it, Robert said during his victim impact statement. The investigation into Watson's post-crime behavior revealed patterns that chilled even experienced detectives. Detective Morrison found evidence that Watson had deliberately sought assignments that would bring him into contact with the Harper family. When Dorothy Harper's desk required electrical work in 1987, Watson had volunteered for the job. When Robert Harper needed welding repairs on his boat trailer in 1991, Watson had offered to help during his lunch break. Watson had also positioned himself strategically within the shipyard's informal information network. Co-workers remembered him as someone who always knew the latest gossip, who asked thoughtful questions about people's personal lives, who remembered details that others forgot. In retrospect, they realized he had been conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence about the very family he had shattered. The psychological autopsy of Watson's behavior revealed what Dr. Chen called trophy interactions, moments when he had deliberately engaged with Patricia's family to relive his crime. Phone records showed that on the anniversary of Patricia's murder each year, Watson would call in sick to work the following day. Co-workers who lived near Watson reported that he would often be seen working in his yard on those days, appearing unusually energetic and focused. Perhaps most disturbing was Watson's involvement in workplace safety discussions about women walking alone to their cars after evening shifts. Following several robberies in the shipyard parking lot during the early 1980s, Watson had been vocal about the need for better lighting and security patrols. He had volunteered to escort female employees to their vehicles. He had suggested policy changes that were implemented and likely prevented other crimes. He was using his knowledge of predatory behavior to appear concerned about safety, explained behavioral analyst Dr. James Rodriguez, who consulted on the case. This served multiple purposes. It reinforced his image as a protector, it gave him access to potential victims, and it allowed him to relive aspects of his own crime under the guise of prevention. The shipyard community struggled with collective guilt and self-examination. Many employees felt complicit in Watson's deception, despite being victims of it themselves. Support groups formed spontaneously among retirees who had worked with Watson. Plant chaplain Reverend Michael Torres organized healing circles where workers could process their shock and confusion. "We trusted him with our secrets, our fears, our celebrations," said maintenance worker Carlos Ruiz, who had considered Watson a close friend. "I told him about my daughter's first date, asked his advice when my son was struggling in school. Now I wonder what he was thinking during those conversations. Was he remembering Patricia? Was he planning something else?" The ripple effects extended beyond the shipyard to Watson's neighborhood, his church, and the broader Mobile community. Watson had been a fixture at Riverside Methodist Church for over 40 years. He had served as an usher, helped with youth group activities, and participated in mission trips to hurricane-damaged areas along the Gulf Coast. Pastor William Jackson struggled to address his congregation's bewilderment and betrayal. "Leonard baptized other people's children in the river behind our church," Pastor Jackson said. "He led prayers for the safety of our community's daughters. He comforted families who had lost loved ones to violence. How do we reconcile these acts of apparent faith with what we now know he was capable of?" Church records showed that Watson had increased his volunteer activities significantly in the months following Patricia's murder, as if using good deeds to balance some internal ledger. He had organized food drives, painted classrooms at the church school, and visited elderly parishioners in nursing homes. His fellow congregants remembered him as exceptionally empathetic, particularly toward those experiencing grief or trauma. The investigation team, led by Detective Morrison and assisted by FBI behavioral analysts, worked to construct a timeline of Watson's activities throughout the decades since Patricia's murder. They found no evidence of additional homicides, but the pattern of psychological manipulation and emotional predation was extensive and methodical. Watson had maintained detailed journals throughout his adult life, ostensibly recording work activities, family events, and spiritual reflections. Forensic analysis revealed coded references to his interactions with the Harper family and other situations where he had successfully deceived people about his true nature. The journals showed a man who took pride in his ability to manipulate others' perceptions, who viewed his co-workers and neighbors as unwitting participants in an elaborate performance. One particularly chilling journal entry from 1995 read, "25 years today, D.H. broke down during the memorial setup. Offered her my handkerchief. She held my hand and thanked me for being such a good friend to their family. If only she knew how good a friend I really am, how well I remember every detail of that night. How clearly I can still see P's face when she realized what was happening." The community's reckoning with Watson's deception sparked broader conversations about the nature of evil and the limits of human perception. Local newspaper editor Amanda Foster wrote a series of articles exploring how Watson's case reflected the difficulty of identifying predators who successfully integrate into respectable society. "Leonard Watson forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our assumptions," Foster wrote. "We want to believe that evil announces itself, that dangerous people look and act differently from us. Watson's 48-year deception proves how wrong we can be. It challenges us to be more vigilant without becoming paranoid, more discerning without losing our capacity for trust." The shipyard implemented new background check procedures and psychological screening protocols following Watson's arrest. While these measures could not have prevented Watson's original crime, they represented the community's attempt to regain some sense of control and security. Plant managers also established support systems for employees struggling with the psychological aftermath of working alongside a killer for decades. Watson's trial, held in Mobile County Superior Court, drew national attention as a case study in long-term deception and delayed justice. Prosecutors presented evidence spanning nearly 5 decades, requiring extraordinary coordination, between multiple law enforcement agencies and forensic laboratories. The jury of 8 women and 4 men deliberated for 3 days before reaching their verdict. During sentencing, Judge Patricia Williams addressed Watson directly. "You have spent 48 years living a lie, accepting the trust and friendship of people you betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. You attended the funeral of a young woman whose life you ended. You comforted the family you destroyed. Your deception compounded their suffering in ways that are difficult to comprehend. While the law prevents me from imposing the death penalty, given your age and health, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Watson, now 73 and suffering from emphysema related to decades of welding fume exposure, showed no visible reaction to the sentence. He had maintained his innocence throughout the legal proceedings, despite overwhelming DNA evidence. His defense attorney's attempts to argue for diminished capacity due to age-related cognitive decline were rejected after extensive psychological evaluation confirmed Watson's mental competency. The Harper family's statement, read by Robert Harper, addressed not only Watson but the broader community. "Our sister Patricia was denied the chance to live her dreams, to marry, to have children, to grow old surrounded by people who loved her. For 48 years we have lived with questions and grief, while her killer walked freely among us. We find some comfort in knowing that justice has finally been served, but we cannot forget that dozens of people trusted and befriended the man who murdered our sister. We hope Patricia's story reminds everyone to stay vigilant, to listen to their instincts, and to never give up hope that truth will eventually emerge." The case prompted changes in how law enforcement agencies handle cold cases, particularly regarding the psychological profiling of suspects who remain integrated in their communities for extended periods. The FBI incorporated lessons from Watson's case into their behavioral analysis training programs, using it as an example of how killers can successfully maintain false personas for decades. Dr. Chen, the forensic psychologist, published research based on Watson's case that contributed to better understanding of what she termed community-integrated psychopaths. Her work emphasized the importance of looking beyond surface behaviors to identify individuals who might be using exceptional community involvement as camouflage for criminal tendencies. The shipyard where Watson worked for 3 decades was eventually decommissioned as part of military restructuring, but its former employees continue to grapple with Watson's betrayal. Annual reunions now include discussions about the case and its impact on their collective memory of their workplace and colleagues. Patricia Harper's grave, which had been visited regularly by family members for 48 years, began receiving flowers from former shipyard workers after Watson's conviction. Many left notes apologizing for unknowingly befriending her killer, expressing grief that they had been manipulated into providing him with cover for his crime. The Mobile Police Department established a victim advocacy program partially inspired by the Harper family's decades-long wait for justice. The program focuses on maintaining contact with cold case families and ensuring they receive updates about new developments or technologies that might affect their cases. Watson died in prison 17 months after his conviction, taking whatever additional secrets he might have harbored to his grave. His death prompted final reflections from those who had known him, worked with him, and been deceived by him for so many years. "I keep thinking about all the times Leonard seemed so genuine," reflected former co-worker Sarah Martinez. "He cried at funerals, celebrated at weddings, worried about his neighbors. Either he was the greatest actor who ever lived, or there's something about human nature that's more complicated than we want to admit." Maybe people can do terrible things and still feel real emotions about other parts of their lives. That's almost more frightening than thinking he was just pretending everything. The Watson case stands as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most convincing masks, that trust can be weaponized by those who understand its power, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be achieved through persistence, advancing technology, and the refusal to forget those whose voices were silenced too soon. Patricia Harper's memory lives on, not only in her family's continued advocacy for cold case victims, but in the lessons learned from finally unmasking the killer who hid among them for 48 years, masquerading as a friend while harboring the darkest of secrets.